Hello and welcome, I'm Tabragdamo. In the now infamous Magdala expedition of 1868, the British sent troops to Ethiopia to ostensibly free British subjects imprisoned by the then Emperor Theodorus. The emperor took his own life, then surrendered. In the aftermath, the British soldiers looted so many valuable objects from churches, as well as the imperial fortress itself. These treasures are now housed in museums with many in private collections. Well, over the years, there have been plenty of efforts in restitution, but largely to no avail. In the past few months, however, some progress has been made through the charity Scheherazade Foundation. And last week, a number of objects from the Magdala loot were handed over to the Ethiopian embassy in London. And my guest today, Tahir Shah, heads that foundation. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you.
So last week, when was it? About 3 days before the Ethiopian New Year, you handed over quite a long list of those treasures to the Ethiopian embassy. Is that correct?
That's right. And, you know, it pleased me very greatly that it was just around the time of the Ethiopian New Year, which gave us an added cause for celebration. And for us at the Scheherazade Foundation, the repatriation of these objects is all about that. It is about celebration. And we're hoping that it will inspire other people to repatriate objects within their own collections.
Do you agree that this is a long list?
You know, I read in the newspapers after our repatriation ceremony in London, I read in the newspapers that this was the largest repatriation of Magdala objects, treasures ever. And it filled me with warmth and pride, because at the Scheherazade Foundation, which I run, we've worked very hard, obviously, to acquire these objects and to draw attention to Magdala and the injustices. But at the same time, it filled me with shock and horror, because we repatriated about 20 or so objects. And this is the tip of the iceberg. At Magdala, the British took many thousands, maybe tens of thousands of objects, some of them the most priceless and sacred objects within the Ethiopian culture. And it horrifies us that a repatriation of 20 objects or so is suddenly deemed as the most significant repatriation in 153 years. There's something wrong about that. And what we want to do is to inspire other people to return objects as well.
So what do we have in the list? We have crosses, we have beakers, we have a shield, we have a magical scroll. Quite an interesting mix, huh?
What I thought was extremely interesting, and maybe this is something that people in the Occidental world, the West, don't appreciate. Ethiopian culture is historically so incredibly all-inclusive and extraordinary. And the objects that we repatriated are really just a very small cross-section of Ethiopian culture itself. Largely, they are associated with the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, as I understand it. For example, we repatriated a small Bible in Ge'ez, written by hand, of course, on vellum, and a large ancient processional cross, and a crown. I think it's a 17th century crown, which I think is a deacon's crown from the church. And there are other objects. The one that interested me very greatly was the so-called magical scroll. And one of our Ethiopian colleagues or friends who attended our repatriation, who's working at the British Library with the Ethiopian documents there, he said it's a magical scroll to turn someone into a lion. And I like that very much.
That's pretty exotic, isn't it? Right?
I love the idea that I love the magic. Well, I just think I think it exemplifies the extraordinary cultural phenomenon, which is Ethiopia. You know, I've been to a lot of African countries. I should say that right now. I've been maybe to about 40 African countries out of about 50. And Ethiopia is so different and so much more, I mean, you use the word exotic right now. I wouldn't use the word exotic, but I'd say it is so much more profound as a country than many others, with so many layers, such a long history.
Right. So how were they obtained? They were going to be auctioned in a couple of places, and a third one would be from an unnamed Brussels collector or art dealer, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe I can start at the beginning. What happened was in January of this year, at the beginning of the year, I was down in Cape Town in South Africa. And a long time ago, 20 years ago, I wrote a book about Ethiopia called In Search of King Solomon's Mines, a travel book. And I made a documentary for National Geographic about my search for King Solomon's Mines. And while I was in Cape Town, the dean of the cathedral in Cape Town, whose name is Dean Michael Weeder, he heard through a friend of a friend that I was in Cape Town and that I knew a little bit about Ethiopia. And he invited me to the cathedral in Cape Town. And he showed me a very, very large, extremely magnificent brass cross, an Ethiopian cross. And inscribed on the neck of the cross, it says, taken at the Battle of Magdala in 1868 from the force of General Napier. And he said to me that he wanted to repatriate it to Ethiopia. And he asked if I could help. And I said I would do what I could. So I messaged my friend, Alula Pankhurst, Dr. Pankhurst in Addis Ababa, whose father was very, very well known, Dr. Richard Pankhurst, and he had been a great friend of mine. And I know he was a great friend of yours as well. And yeah, and such a champion. He was such a champion of all things Ethiopian. And the next thing I knew, I got a call in about May or April or May from the Ethiopian government. And it said that some small but significant objects are going for sale in a small auction in the countryside in England. And could I help acquire them? And just by chance, and this is how life is, in my life is anyway, by chance, a very close friend of mine lived in this very small town in the county of Dorset. And to make a long story short, I asked him to go and arrange to have them removed from sale, and
so that you can privately negotiate.
And we bought them. Yes, and we worked with the Ethiopian embassy on that, and then we beavered away, and we found a couple of dealers actually on the continent of Europe, and objects started to come out with a clear provenance that they were linked to Magdala.
And then you had to buy them, is that correct?
Yeah, and then we purchased them. I should say right now, the danger, of course, is that when a buyer steps forward and clearly willing to spend on objects like these objects from Magdala, prices tend to go up. They go up very fast. And so we dislike having to buy these objects because even in the space of a few months, the prices have rocketed up.
You'd rather have them donated, correct?
Well, I think that's more appropriate. I think what we have to remember, Tafara, is these are stolen objects. And it's just like if someone broke into my house and stole my bicycle, and then I went to a market and I had to buy my bicycle back. There's no honor in that. And that made me frustrated and quite angry. I think there's no beauty in having to buy back stolen objects that you, or in your case, in this case, Ethiopian people owned. These are Ethiopian objects which were stolen, and people were killed, when the British were stealing them. So I think it's quite shocking that they have to be bought back at all.
Why is it, well, that brings me to another question. Why is it fairly difficult, restitution is difficult from England, from Great Britain? We have tons of these loots from Magdala in the British Museum, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, in the King's Own Regiment Museum, and so on and so forth, and not to mention in private collections. Why is it difficult to effect restitution in this regard?
Listen, there's the answer to that. That is the easiest question to answer, and it's a one-word answer. It's the word precedent. Precedent. The British Museum, for instance, or the Victoria and Albert Museum in Southwest London, or other museums that have vast collections of Ethiopian treasure. You cannot imagine. Most of it you don't realize is even there, but if you start digging away, you see, oh, it's there. It was acquired, the acquisition lists, which they really make quite difficult to find.
Yeah, precedence, an interesting word, but I mean, we're talking at least of the stabots.
Yeah, well, look.
You're not going to showcase them. You're not going to make them public. Listen, you're not going to put them on a traveling exhibition. You're not going to do anything with them. These belong in the church. I mean, at least the tabots could be donated. I mean, they could be returned. Why is it difficult to do that?
Listen, as we say, you're preaching to the choir. I am absolutely behind that, and it's for that reason that my foundation, my charity, the Scheherazade Foundation, has hired one of the leading barristers, lawyers from the Queen's Bench, a QC barrister in human rights, to put a legal case to the British Museum, which is actually being discussed. It will be discussed by the Ethiopian ambassador and the head of the British Museum, Hartwig Fisher, tomorrow at a very high level meeting. And what we've done at Scheherazade Foundation is as I said, we brought on board an incredibly high powered British barrister, lawyer, and she drew up the legal case. And when I started discussing with her, with my team about the tabots a few months ago, I started getting very emotional. And her name is Samantha Knights, and she's very well known, this lawyer. And I got emotional, and I said, "This is crazy. These objects cannot, just like you said, cannot be put on display, studied, photographed, lent to another museum. It's like a joke situation. It's ridiculous." And she said to me, "Let's not fight the moral battle, because the moral battle is undisputable. It's obvious. The British Museum has no right to the moral ground here." But she said, instead, let's fight the legal battle, and we'll make a straight legal case. We will do it in a way that the British will understand. And I want to make a point which is so incredibly interesting, and it has been it's been overlooked by almost everyone, and it's this. The British Museum has 20 trustees, and some of them are appointed through political channels. Boris Johnson, a lot of them he's brought them in, and others are from wider British culture. But the key point is, it is the 20 trustees of the British Museum who have the duty to decide whether an object is de-accessed, is removed from its collection. It is not the government of Britain, and it is not Hartwig Fisher, who is the director of the British Museum.
But the government,
so that is the key point.
But the government has an influence, more so the Queen, and I understand that you have written actually through your daughter. You wrote a letter to the Queen for a couple of things, I guess.
That's right. That's right, and that's slightly.
Don't they have any moral authority?
It's fascinating. The Queen, as I understand it, has no moral authority over the British Museum. But in Britain, what you've got is you've got injustice is what you have in Britain. But you have different grades and strains and packages of injustice. So you've got the British Museum, who won't give their 10,000 or more objects from Magdala back. Why? Because they're so terrified. They are terrified of losing everything in their collection. They are beyond terrified that one day, very soon, everything will be removed. And my point is, excuse me, people, and I'm British. I'm okay from all kinds of countries genetically, but I'm British. I know how to deal with the British. And my point is, these are stolen goods. This is like a used stolen car showroom, where everything is stolen. I mean, how can we celebrate it? Yes, it's in a big building with big names on the walls and the crowns and the Queen's emblem and all of that. But this is used stolen goods. And to answer your question, sorry, you asked about the Queen and us writing to her. This is a slightly different matter, but equally important and in parallel. As many Ethiopians will know, and as almost no British people remember, at the Battle of Magdala, the Emperor Theodros committed suicide, apparently, with a revolver that was sent by Queen Victoria. And his wife, the Empress, died. And the orphaned child, the crown prince, the imperial, crown prince, whose name was Prince Alamayu, as Ethiopians will know, he was brought to Britain by a captain in the British Army called Captain Speedy, Speedy. I really recommend anyone watching this to Google Captain Speedy and the name Alamayu. There are really quite almost perverted and shocking pictures of Captain Speedy dressed in Ethiopian dress, an English officer dressed as he thought Ethiopian dress was worn, holding this boy. And he adopted the boy, Alamayu, the prince, and he was sent to an English school, and he died aged just 18, 11 years after Magdala. Yeah. And his remains are interred at Windsor Castle, one of the Queen's palaces. And we wrote to the Queen to say the Ethiopian people would like the remains of His Highness the Prince Alamayu back. And we got I shared it with you, and we got a very weak letter back saying, yes, it'll be rather difficult to get to the remains because there are other remains. Excuse me, this is baloney, no, as they say in America. They said no, in a really kind of cringing and pathetic way. And I have great respect for Britain in so many ways, but I would like to think that a former, world power, as they love to tell you in Britain, I like to think that they would have more honor than they do, because it's wretched how they're behaving.
Right, right. So briefly, what next?
Well, as I said, tomorrow, hopefully, the British Museum is meeting the Ethiopian ambassador, and they will be discussing, as I understand it, the legal framework and consideration that we've put in place. We'll see how the British Museum handle it. My sense is that they're going to try something on, which is to delay, because the British love taking control of the timeline. It's a classic British technique. If you own the timeline, of a situation or a battle or a whatever, anything, you have reached this kind of power zone. What's important is for Ethiopian people and for people elsewhere in the world to draw attention to the subject of the 11 tablets in the British Museum on social media. I'm not saying to do it in a hostile way. No. I'm saying to do it in an educational way, to keep it alive and remember something here. Finally, once I got through all the layers of the British Museum website, I realized that one of the tablets was only acquired by the British Museum in 1991, and another of the 11 tablets was acquired in 1968, I think. So they've still been acquiring these things until pretty recently, which sends a kind of an even more distasteful message, in my opinion.
Yeah, I understand.
But
well, let's hope for the best, and it will be able to sort these things out sooner than later. And Tahir, it was really a pleasure having you on my show, and thank you really for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Tafara. And I want to tell you, I'm the biggest fan of Ethiopia, and I love your